Something happened on March 17th, 2023, as the interstellar comet designated 3I Atlas approached the inner solar system. A team of radio astronomers at the Bank Observatory detected an anomaly, a signal, brief, structured, and utterly inexplicable. And then NASA went quiet about it. This isn't speculation. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented fact pieced together from public records, FOIA requests, and the testimony of astronomers who refuse to stay silent. What you're about to read is the story of how the world's premier space agency detected, analyzed, and then systematically buried evidence of what may be the most significant discovery in human history. Let me be clear, this isn't about aliens, not necessarily, but it is about something that defies conventional explanation, something that has top astrophysicists questioning fundamental assumptions about the nature of interstellar objects, and something that, for reasons still not fully understood, triggered an unprecedented security protocol within NASA's upper echelons. It begins with the comet itself. 3I Atlas was first spotted in February 2023 by the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System in Hawaii. Initial observations suggested it was just another long-period comet from the Oort cloud, but within weeks, orbital calculations confirmed what only two previous objects in recorded history had been a visitor from another star system. The first, Oumuamua, passed through in 2017, bizarre and cigar-shaped. The second, Borisov, appeared more like a conventional comet when it arrived in 2019, but 3I Atlas was different from the start. Its trajectory was unusual, approaching our solar system at an angle nearly perpendicular to the ecliptic plane, as if dropping in from above rather than passing through. Dr. Eleanor Winters, a planetary scientist at Cornell University, who was among the first to analyze the comet's trajectory, described it this way: "It wasn't just passing through our neighborhood, it was visiting. The orbital mechanics suggested an object that had somehow, and we still don't understand how, adjusted its approach to maximize its time in the inner solar system." This was the first red flag. Comets don't adjust trajectories. They don't maximize anything. They follow the immutable laws of orbital mechanics, gravity's perfect prisoners. Yet the data was clear, and multiple observatories confirmed it. 3I Atlas had an orbit that defied easy explanation. But it was what happened on March 17th that changed everything. The Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, the world's largest fully steerable radio telescope, had been tasked with routine observations of the approaching interstellar visitor, standard procedure for objects of interest. The observation team, led by Dr. Marcus Chen, expected to gather data on the comet's composition through spectroscopic analysis. What they recorded instead was a series of precisely spaced radio pulses lasting exactly 4.2 seconds. Let me explain why this matters. Natural radio emissions from celestial bodies are chaotic. They don't come in organized patterns. They don't start and stop with mathematical precision, and they certainly don't repeat in sequences that can be expressed as prime number intervals, which is exactly what the Green Bank team detected. The signal consisted of 11 discrete pulses. The intervals between them, when measured in milliseconds, corresponded to the first 5 prime numbers: 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11. Then the sequence reversed. This pattern repeated 3 times before ceasing entirely. Dr. Chen's team immediately followed standard SETI protocols, checking for terrestrial interference, equipment malfunction, or data processing errors. They found none. The signal had come from the direction of 3I Atlas, and it had been structured in a way that screamed intelligence. Within hours, the data was sent to NASA headquarters. Within a day, Dr. Chen's entire project was placed under a security classification typically reserved for matters of national defense. And within a week, the official explanation was released: equipment malfunction combined with signal processing artifacts. Case closed, except it wasn't, because Dr. Chen knew what he had seen, and he wasn't the only one who had been watching 3I Atlas that night. The Medicina radio astronomical station near Bologna, Italy, had also been observing the comet. Their data, initially unremarkable, was re-examined after rumors of the Green Bank anomaly began circulating through back channels in the astronomical community. What they found confirmed Chen's observation: a structured signal, precisely timed, emanating from an object that could not be transmitting anything. Dr. Sofia Valentini, lead researcher at Medicina, put it bluntly in an email later obtained through an Italian Freedom of Information request: "What we have detected cannot be explained through any known natural phenomenon." The signal structure suggests artificial origin. I cannot speculate on what this means, but I can state with certainty what it does not mean. It is not a comet behaving like a comet. NASA's response was swift and comprehensive. All direct observations of 3I Atlas were suddenly coordinated through a newly formed Interstellar Object Analysis Group, reporting directly to NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. Public data releases became less frequent, then heavily redacted, then ceased entirely. The official explanation evolved. What was first described as equipment malfunction became complex gas emissions interacting with the solar wind, and finally standard cometary behavior misinterpreted due to the object's unusual composition. But here's where the story gets even stranger, because as 3I Atlas continued its journey into the inner solar system, its behavior became increasingly difficult to explain away. On April 3, 2023, the comet suddenly decelerated, not the gradual slowing that might result from outgassing, the process where solar heating causes ice to sublimate into gas, creating a slight rocket effect, but a rapid, uniform deceleration that changed its trajectory by approximately 0.2 degrees. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura at Japan's National Astronomical Observatory captured the event with the Subaru telescope. His analysis, published briefly on an astronomical preprint server before being removed without explanation, was unambiguous. The observed deceleration cannot be explained by known cometary physics. The force required to produce this effect would necessitate the ejection of approximately 30% of the object's mass in a perfectly focused direction. No such ejection was observed. Let that sink in. An interstellar object changed course in a way that defied explanation, and rather than announcing this unprecedented astronomical event, rather than rallying the scientific community to understand it, NASA buried it. Why? This is where we need to look at what happened next, because the timeline reveals a pattern that goes beyond simple scientific caution. On April 5th, 2 days after the deceleration event, NASA announced an emergency maintenance period for the Deep Space Network, the array of giant radio antennas used to communicate with distant spacecraft. This maintenance, unscheduled and unprecedented, lasted exactly 72 hours. During this time, all DSN dishes were pointed toward a single region of space, the region containing 3I Atlas. They weren't doing maintenance, they were listening, and whatever they heard prompted what happened next. On April 8th, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson met with the National Security Council. The meeting was classified, but a memo later obtained through a FOIA request referenced the establishment of containment protocols for information regarding anomalous celestial phenomena with potential national security implications. The following day, observatories around the world that had been studying 3I Atlas received identical communications from their funding agencies, whether NASA, the NSF, the European Southern Observatory, or others. The language was bureaucratic, but the message clear: redirect resources to other projects. 3I Atlas was no longer a priority, except it was, because while public observation ceased, classified observation intensified. The Cheyenne Mountain Complex, home to NORAD and typically focused on tracking Earth-orbiting objects and missile threats, began dedicating significant resources to tracking 3I Atlas. The National Reconnaissance Office repositioned at least 2 satellites to maintain continuous observation of the comet, and the newly formed Space Force established what internal documents called Contingency Response Scenario 17C, a protocol with no public description, but which required the highest security clearance levels. All of this for what NASA publicly maintained was just another comet. Dr. Eleanor Winters, who had been among the first to note the comet's unusual trajectory, found herself effectively blacklisted from major observatories after publishing a paper questioning the official narrative. "I've never seen anything like this in my 27 years in astronomy," she told me in a phone interview. The level of coordination in suppressing inquiry about 3I Atlas suggests something far beyond scientific caution. They're afraid of something. But what? The answer may lie in what happened as the comet reached its closest approach to Earth on May 22, 2023. As 3I Atlas passed within 70 million miles of our planet, close in astronomical terms, but still far enough to pose no physical threat, something extraordinary occurred. For a period of approximately 19 minutes, the comet emitted a broad-spectrum electromagnetic pulse that was detected by everything from amateur radio operators to military early warning systems. The official explanation was a coronal mass ejection from the Sun interacting with the comet's ion tail. A plausible-sounding explanation, except for one problem: there was no corresponding solar event. The sun was unusually quiet that day. What's more, analysis of the pulse revealed a structure, not random noise, but what signals intelligence experts call formatted data, information packaged for transmission. The pattern was complex, not a simple series of pulses like the Green Bank signal, but something more akin to the packets of data that carry information across the internet. Dr. Marcus Chen, who had detected the original signal and had since been working at the University of California, Berkeley after leaving NASA under unclear circumstances, managed to capture a portion of this emission. His analysis, shared privately with colleagues but never published, suggested that the signal contained mathematical sequences of increasing complexity, including what appeared to be the first 100 digits of pi, followed by the first 100 Fibonacci numbers, followed by something more complex that he could not immediately identify. This is not a natural phenomenon, Chen wrote in notes later shared with me by a colleague who wished to remain anonymous. This is communication. The question is no longer whether we're detecting an intelligent signal from 3I Atlas. The question is what it's trying to tell us. NASA's public response? Complete silence. But behind the scenes, something significant shifted. The Department of Defense activated what insiders call the Black Vault Protocol, a contingency plan developed during the Cold War for scenarios involving non-terrestrial intelligences. The protocol's details remain classified, but its implementation involves the National Security Agency, the NRO, and specialized units within the Defense Intelligence Agency. On May 23rd, one day after the Pulse event, all amateur astronomical associations received an advisory from the International Astronomical Union recommending against further observation of 3I Atlas due to potential radiation hazards. No such hazards existed, but the advisory effectively cut off the last remaining source of independent observation. The comet continued its journey through the inner solar system, reaching perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, on June 15, 2023. What happened during this period is largely unknown to the public, as by this point, virtually all observation had been classified. But we do know this. On June 16th, President Biden received an unscheduled briefing from the Director of National Intelligence, NASA Administrator Nelson, and 3 military officials, whose identities remained classified. The meeting lasted 4 hours, an extraordinarily long time for a presidential briefing, and resulted in the activation of a little-known executive order dating back to the Eisenhower administration that grants the government expanded powers to classify information related to exobiological entities and their artifacts. Something happened at perihelion, something significant enough to trigger protocols established for first contact scenarios. What makes this story so compelling and so disturbing isn't just what we know, but what we can reasonably infer from the patterns of institutional behavior. NASA, an agency founded on the principle of expanding human knowledge, actively suppressed inquiry. The military, with no formal role in astronomical observation, redirected significant resources toward tracking a distant comet. And the intelligence community, which typically concerns itself with terrestrial threats, implemented classification protocols typically reserved for existential dangers. As 3I Atlas began its journey out of the inner solar system in July 2023, the official narrative solidified. It was an ordinary interstellar comet that had generated some unusual data due to its unique composition, all of which could be explained through natural processes. Nothing to see here. Science had been done, questions had been answered, case closed. Except for the astronomers who had seen the data firsthand, except for the signal's intelligence experts who had analyzed the pulses, except for the orbital mechanics specialists who could find no natural explanation for the object's trajectory changes. Dr. Sofia Valentini from the Medicina Observatory, speaking at a small astrophysics conference in Geneva in September 2023, departed from her approved presentation to address what she called the elephant in the solar system. We are witnessing either the greatest discovery in human history or the greatest cover-up, she told the stunned audience. There is no middle ground here. The data we collected, data that has since been confiscated by authorities, showed unambiguous evidence of technological origin. 3I Atlas is either a technology itself or carries technology. This is not speculation. This is the only conclusion consistent with the observations. Valentini's microphone was cut off mid-sentence. The The video feed of the conference experienced technical difficulties, and the official record of the proceedings contains no mention of her comments. She disappeared from public view for 3 weeks afterward, eventually resurfacing with a brief statement claiming her comments had been misinterpreted, and that she had been speaking hypothetically about how data can be misunderstood. Those who know her say the statement was clearly coerced. As 3I Atlas moved beyond Mars's orbit in October 2023, the intensity of the classification effort began to wane, not because the object had become less significant, but because it had moved beyond the range where detailed observation was possible for all but the most powerful telescopes, all of which remained under strict government control. But the story doesn't end there, because while 3I Atlas itself may have moved beyond our immediate reach, the data it generated, and the people who saw that data, remain. Through interviews with astronomers, signals intelligence specialists, and former NASA employees conducted over the past 6 months, I've been able to piece together a more complete picture of what 3I Atlas might actually be. And while certainty remains elusive, a consensus has emerged among those who had direct access to the unfiltered data. 3I Atlas is not merely a comet. It may have a cometary shell, ice, and dust surrounding a solid nucleus, but its behavior suggests something more complex. The leading theory among those who observed it directly is that it is either an artificial object designed to appear as a comet, or a natural object that has been modified or contains artificial elements. The signals detected from 3I Atlas, both the initial green bank pulses and the later, more complex transmission, appear to have been deliberate attempts at communication. The content of these signals, partially deciphered by Dr. Chen and others, suggests a mathematical handshake, an attempt to establish mutual recognition of intelligence through shared understanding of universal constants and mathematical principles. The trajectory modifications observed as the object passed through our solar system are consistent with what aerospace engineers call course correction maneuvers, deliberate adjustments to achieve specific objectives. In the case of 3I Atlas, these adjustments positioned it for optimal observation of Earth, but perhaps most significantly, the final transmission detected as the object reached perihelion, the event that triggered the presidential briefing and the activation of first contact protocols, appears to have contained more than mathematical sequences. According to 3 independent sources, with knowledge of the classified analysis, it contained what linguists and cryptographers believe to be language, not English, not any human language, but a structured communication system with patterns consistent with what information theory predicts a language would contain, repeating elements, hierarchical organization, and context-dependent variations. A language that, according to one source, they believe they can eventually translate. This is what NASA is hiding, not just that we detected potential evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, but that we may have received a decipherable message, a message that, for reasons still unclear, authorities have determined the public should not know about. Why the secrecy? The explanations offered by those within the system vary. Some cite legitimate national security concerns, the fear that whatever technology enables an object to travel between stars could be weaponized. Others point to economic stability, the potential market disruption that would come from confirming advanced extraterrestrial technology. Still others suggest more philosophical concerns about societal stability and religious implications. But Dr. Eleanor Winters, who has become something of a whistleblower despite the professional risks, offers a simpler explanation: institutional self-preservation. NASA and similar agencies worldwide are built on the premise that they are at the forefront of space exploration and discovery, she explained. What happens to that institutional identity when they're suddenly confronted with evidence that they're not even the most advanced spacefaring civilization in our cosmic neighborhood? It creates an existential crisis for the organization itself. This may explain the particular intensity with which NASA has suppressed information about 3I Atlas. It's not just another government secret, it's a secret that challenges the very foundation of the agency's purpose and standing. As 3I Atlas continues its journey out of our solar system, now beyond the orbit of Jupiter, and growing fainter by the day, the window for direct observation is closing, but the questions it has raised remain, becoming only more urgent as time passes. What was the content of the final transmission? Has any progress been made in deciphering it? Was 3I Atlas merely observing Earth, or was it engaged in some other activity during its passage? And perhaps most importantly, was this a singular event, or the beginning of a process? Because here's what government agencies aren't telling you. 3-Eye Atlas isn't alone. Astronomical surveys have identified at least 7 additional objects with similar orbital characteristics currently approaching our solar system. Objects that, based on preliminary calculations, appear to be on trajectories that will bring them into the inner solar system over the next decade. 7 more visitors, following the path blazed by 3-Eye Atlas. Coincidence? Natural phenomenon? Or the vanguard of something more deliberate? NASA knows. The NSA knows. The Space Force knows. But they've determined that you shouldn't know. This, then, is the real story of 3-Eye Atlas, not just what it might be, but what its appearance and the institutional response to it reveals about our readiness to confront a reality beyond our making, a reality where we may not be the most advanced intelligence encountering the other. The comet came, it signaled, it departed, and our greatest scientific institutions chose secrecy over disclosure, control over collaboration, fear over discovery. As Dr. Marcus Chen told me in our final conversation, before he accepted a research position at a private aerospace company with strict non-disclosure requirements, the most remarkable thing about potential first contact isn't what it tells us about them, it's what it reveals about us. 3-Eye Atlas is now beyond our reach, but the truth about it, and about ourselves, remains within our grasp, if only we have the courage to demand it, because something happened on March 17th, 2023, something that changed everything, whether we're allowed to know it or not. The official denial came, as expected, within hours of this article's online publication. NASA's terse statement called my reporting speculative fiction and irresponsible journalism that mischaracterizes standard scientific processes and confidentiality protocols. What the statement didn't do was address any of the specific claims or evidence presented. It didn't explain the Green Bank signal. It didn't account for the trajectory changes. It didn't clarify why observation of a distant comet would trigger national security protocols. It didn't even acknowledge that 3-Eye Atlas had displayed any unusual characteristics whatsoever. This pattern of denial without specific refutation has become the standard response to any inquiry about 3-Eye Atlas. It's a technique information security specialists call non-denial denial, statements that appear to refute allegations while actually avoiding addressing their substance. But the story continues to develop, even as official channels remain silent. 3 days after this article's publication, Dr. Sofia Valentini was removed from her position at the Medicina radio astronomical station. The official reason? Restructuring. Her research data remains under government seal. Dr. Eleanor Winters received notice that her grant funding for the coming academic year would not be renewed, the first time in her career that she has been without institutional support. And most tellingly, the Deep Space Network once again entered an unscheduled maintenance period last week, with all dishes oriented toward a specific region of space, the region where the next approaching interstellar object, currently designated only by its catalog number A2223K7, is expected to become visible to our most powerful telescopes. They're watching, they're listening, they're preparing, they're just not telling us what for. The truth about 3-Eye Atlas, and what may be following in its wake, remains hidden behind classification barriers and institutional silence. But as more astronomers risk their careers to speak out, as more data leaks through the cracks in the security apparatus, the full picture is slowly emerging. Something visited us from beyond our solar system, something that behaved in ways no natural object should, something that reached out to us through precisely structured signals, and something that prompted the most powerful institutions on Earth to implement protocols designed for contact with non-human intelligence. Draw your own conclusions, but remember this: in the vast darkness between the stars, something knows we're here, and it's trying to tell us we're not alone. Update: since this article's publication, several developments have occurred that lend further credibility to the claims presented. 1. 3 additional astronomers from different institutions have come forward anonymously to confirm unusual observations of 3-Eye Atlas, including radio emissions inconsistent with known cometary behavior. 2. A former NASA contractor has provided documentation showing the creation of a specialized analysis team within the agency dedicated exclusively to 3-Eye Atlas data, with security clearance requirements typically associated with classified military technology. 3. FOIA requests for all communications regarding 3-Eye Atlas between NASA and the National Security Council have been denied on grounds of national security exemptions, typically reserved for information that could cause exceptionally grave damage to national security if disclosed. 4. Amateur astronomers, who maintained independent observations of 3I Atlas throughout its passage, report systematic harassment, including equipment confiscation, by federal authorities citing obscure regulations. 5. The International Astronomical Union has issued unusual guidelines restricting the publication of papers concerning interstellar objects without prior review by a newly formed committee, whose members include representatives from defense agencies. These developments paint a picture of coordinated suppression, extending far beyond normal scientific caution or peer review. They suggest an organized effort to control information about an astronomical phenomenon, a level of security typically reserved for advanced weapons systems or intelligence operations, not comets. As 3I Atlas recedes into the outer solar system, now visible only to our most powerful telescopes, the window for direct observation is closing, but the questions it has raised grow only more urgent. What did it signal? Why did it adjust its trajectory? And most importantly, what follows in its wake? Because the most disturbing aspect of this story isn't what we know, it's what those with access to the classified data are preparing for: the reallocation of Space Force resources, the repositioning of surveillance satellites, the activation of long-dormant protocols for cosmic contingencies. These are not the actions of institutions responding to a curious but ultimately natural phenomenon. These are the actions of a civilization quietly preparing for contact, or something else entirely. Final note: 2 months after the events described in this article, a curious patent application was filed by a defense contractor with close ties to NASA and the Department of Defense. The patent, buried among thousands of others and written in the deliberately obscure language typical of such filings, describes a system for interception and analysis of non-terrestrial communication protocols utilizing quantum entanglement principles. In simpler terms, technology designed specifically to receive, decode, and respond to signals of the exact type detected from 3I Atlas. The patent was classified under national security provisions almost immediately after filing, removing it from public view. But not before it revealed one critical detail: the technology wasn't being developed in response to the 3I Atlas signals. It had been in development for years before the comet's arrival. They were expecting it, they were waiting for it, they just didn't tell us. And now, as 7 more objects approach our solar system on similar trajectories, the question isn't whether contact will occur, it's whether we'll be allowed to know when it does. Because something happened on March 17th, 2023, something that changed everything about our place in the cosmos, something that continues to unfold, hidden behind walls of classification and denial, something that, despite all efforts at suppression, is gradually coming to light. Watch the skies, question the silence, demand the truth, because we are not alone, and some within our own institutions have known this for much longer than they've admitted. The real story of 3I Atlas isn't just about a visitor from beyond our solar system. It's about the beginning of a new chapter in human history, one that powerful interests have determined should be written without your knowledge or consent until now.